would, but oh well.
That's fine.
Hi everyone. We said we'd be on at 7, and we've had some technical difficulties. I actually think it's going to feed into our conversation tonight, but let me introduce ourselves first. My name is Laura Lee. I'm the Young Parents Director, and I'm here with Katie, who is a leader with our Young Parents Ministry as well. And we are here to have a conversation about the theme of Turning Point, which has been something that we are discussing together in our young parents groups and something we wanted to talk about tonight. And tonight's topic is moving from fear to faith. But before we begin, I want to remind all of us, anybody watching now or in the future, what a turning point is. Turning point is a place on your journey where you may feel stuck, you may feel lost, but it is a decisive place in your journey where you make a change. Katie, will you have anything to add to that? Have I missed anything of that definition?
I don't think so. I think, there's often a decision that needs to be made, and in some way or another, after that decision is made and you take an action, then the course is altered in some way. And I don't remember the words you specifically used, but you said something about like almost in negative terms, but I think sometimes it can be positive too. Like there can be exciting things that happen that bring turning points in our lives. And we're not talking about necessarily one of those tonight, but sometimes turning points are really positive. And even some of the negative ones can bring out positive things in our lives. Absolutely. But there's often really exciting turning points too. Like,
I really do think we are looking for that decision on the road, of life, which brings about beneficial results or moves us towards something that's beneficial for us. And sometimes it feels like we're stuck or lost, but it's actually the place at which we're moving on a better trajectory. So that's a little overview of what a turning point means. And tonight we're talking about fear. And I know that fear has such a spectrum, and I think it's important to define and like, how is fear a turning point? So we're going to explore that a little bit with you tonight over the next few minutes. Really condensed, short, but if you're tuning in at all, we'd love to hear from you. I'll try my best to view the comments. But we've had many technical difficulties before getting on here, and that feeds my fear that we set all this up and it's not going to move forward successfully. And I just thought I would share that because it's a little bit difficult tonight. So let's talk about that spectrum. From fear on one hand can be just the like caution, the alarm system that's built right within us, how we were actually made to operate. And I think specifically for young parents, we have that as parents to protect, to keep safe, to make good decisions, to be cautious. That's on one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum is a sense of fear just overtaking our thinking and imagining into what can happen on an obsessive level. And there's somewhere in the middle where we might be too. What do you think about that, Katie? Like, do you think about what are those spectrums? And I would say almost like from healthy fear to unhealthy fear.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think what you said is important, that it is something that's made within us. Like fear is not a bad thing. It protects us and keeps us safe. In fact, if you ever know somebody who is totally fearless, it can be really scary, especially if you have a child who is incredibly fearless. That can be a really scary thing, especially when they're little. Like I remember I had a friend who had a toddler who was very physically advanced. Like he walked at 8 months and had no fear of anything. So he's climbing up bookshelves and you're like, it's terrifying for the parents because the child doesn't have a concept of fear. So it is something that is in us that keeps us safe, that helps us progress in life, that helps us survive, like actually live in our bodies. But then there can be a level where not only consumes our thoughts, but limits or affects the way that we're actually living, whether it's the way we interact with other people or not interact with other people. Yeah, it can just impact our relationships and our quality of life when fear reaches that unhealthy level that you mentioned.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say here, just to give a little advisory, that there is maybe a difference between that fear, which is an emotional response to a threat to our safety, and what is anxiety or an anxiety disorder. And so tonight we're actually talking about fear in the sense of that emotional response to perceived danger. We do want to highlight the importance of mental health care if one is experiencing ongoing anxiety that affects day-to-day life. There might, it's good to have these conversations, but also keep in mind that people struggle on a different level and it's not all the same. And important to find both a healthy balance when it comes to that spectrum of fear, and also take into consideration which can be anxiety as a mental health challenge as well. Just wanted to mention that. That's, I think, important. So what's an example of fear in everyday life that you can think of? Like a healthy,
Yeah. So my kids are all reaching kind of new stages of independence. So my oldest just turned 18 on the weekend. So he's, getting ready to leave. But with the middle one, who's almost 11, there are certain things that he feels ready to do that I'm like, we are about a block and a half from a library, and he wants to be able to go to the library alone. And I have some fear around it. And I think there's some help, because it means that we talk about what it means to go out in a public place by yourself, what it means to know where the safe people are, all those discussions. So that's one for me. Even when my kids we have a friend across the street, or they have a friend across the street, teaching them to look both ways and watch for cars and stuff like that. So I think, like you mentioned before, as parents, we have some fears around our kids, and it's different at every level. And those are healthy, because it means that we are teaching our kids safety. I mean, I guess if it reached an unhealthy level, I could, never let them do anything.
That's a great point.
And sometimes it does. It's like, well, like with the library thing, we've had some like real conversations where he's like, I'm ready. And anyway, but I think there are everyday things like that, and again, that I think helps to keep them safe when you're able to have those discussions. And when you do have some fear, it just helps keep you alert to things. I'm afraid of heights. I don't like heights. That's another one. But
I was actually thinking of the phobias that we have. They're actually named fear of, like, obviously there's people who have a fear of heights, fear of public speaking, fear of death, there's all kinds, and then there's some very unique ones. And those phobias are, on one hand, where are they on that scale? It's hard to say. But thinking about where you are on that scale, moving from healthy to unhealthy. And I've been thinking about how do you know when you enter the healthy territory of fear? Is there examples of when it is not just a caution? And it's now moving into territory where it's occupying, brain space.
I think I'll admit that I don't have much experience with this, of my own personal experience of feeling, although maybe it's just never been pointed out to me. So I wonder if there is any internal, like, of your own insight that would be setting off alarms, or does it have to come from somebody else? I don't know. But I think once it starts to really limit the normal parts of life, like affecting your close relationships. And I think we live in an age now where, maybe it's always been this way in humanity, where people, particularly in positions of power, know that fear is what drives a lot of people. And
Mm.
so in an age of social media, like there is fear, reasons to be afraid that are plastered all over all the time. And I think for many people that can become consuming, and it feels like knowledge. It feels like, well, I know this, and so
Mhm.
I have this knowledge, and so I can protect myself. But then it can go down a road of yeah, of just really altering your quality of life, affecting relationships, ending relationships, not taking, certain opportunities or other turning points that are coming up in your life, or,
Mhm.
everything just can start to feel blocked when there's so much fear about whatever the thing may be. But
If anybody's tuning in right now,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear we're hopefully be able to see your comment of how can you tell when a healthy fear, which is those cautions and things that keep you safe and move into unhealthy.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, yeah, you brought up some great points, Katie. And one that really sticks out to me is when you're not able to enjoy life
Yeah.
because you're so on guard about life. That to me
Yeah.
is very, like, if there's a lack of joy, it may be that fear has overtaken you.
Mhm.
Um,
Especially, like, I understand that there are, circumstances. We are privileged not to live in a country that's currently like in a state of war.
mhm,
I understand if you are constantly living in fear in a situation where, you're physical. And there are other situations too, within homes where
mhm,
fear can be a very real thing. Um, but yeah, when it's these external fears that are affecting
mm,
the way that you're living internally is, I think that's where it starts to become
yeah.
a challenge.
You
Yeah.
bring up a great point because it almost is like, do your fears line up with reality? And that
Yes.
sometimes is
Yeah. Yeah.
a hard thing to judge. And sometimes you need an
Mhm.
outside perspective and to surround
Mhm.
yourself with people. Um, we actually talked about this in one of the groups today, one of the young parents groups. We were talking about, what do you do when you're afraid? And some people were talking about, well, we go to people that we know, love, and trust,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
spend time with them to give us a better perspective.
Yeah.
um, so what about you, Katie? You're saying this is maybe fear isn't maybe top of mind for you. You
Mhm.
have other struggles, perhaps.
Sure do.
We won't
Another night.
drag them out into the open, but it's
Yeah.
still presumably, like, even when you talk about your son walking to school or to the library, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, what do you tell yourself when you're afraid? How do you manage that?
Um, well, there are different, part of it is, having conversations with him around
Mhm,
it. So when it affects him, but also I try to walk through in my head, like realistic things and what, you know, what is likely and what is very
mhm.
unlikely to happen in these situations.
Yes.
But I think I don't know if you're going this way yet, but I think for me, I also have um, a faith that God protects my children. Oh, I'm going to get
Mhm,
emotional about it. um,
mhm,
that He has absolutely entrusted them to me, and it's
mhm,
my responsibility to keep them safe within my ability and all that, but not um, to smother them completely. And so I think for me that in my parenting is huge, and a burden lifted too,
mm.
that I love my children immensely, but I know that God loves them more, um and is watching out for them when I can't be there and when I am there. So that's part of it for me for sure.
Yeah, that's really important to hear. I think, Katie, that taps into, what do we do when we're afraid?
Mhm.
And we got a heart
Mhm.
from that. Thank you. Somebody loves what you said, Katie. Um, but our response kind of guides our fears, and whether we're
Mhm.
stoking the fire of our fears or putting it out, dousing it with faith. And
Yeah, yeah.
what are some things that we do that actually can trigger our unhealthy fears? I think that's
Mhm.
really important to talk about. What makes us afraid and
Oh,
brings
yeah.
that out in us?
Yeah. Well, like with this example of the library, very specifically, I was listening to a podcast about kidnapped children, and then the next day, my son said, "Hey, can I go to the library?" I said, "Absolutely not." And I then after was like, you know what? I've been feeding my mind because I like a good true crime podcast. But I'm like, you know what? There's certain ones that I don't think are helpful for me right now in this stage of life to be listening to. It's not productive. It doesn't. I mean, I wouldn't share that with him, but like, even if I were to, that isn't helpful for him to have that level of fear. So that's a specific example for me where I was like, yeah, this is not helpful. But I think again, something like social media, and the tricky thing with social media is once, it knows what you are doing. So like if you are watching newsreels about a particular thing, that's going to show up again and again and again on your feed. And it's so hard to look away, to take time away from it. But yeah, TV shows, news, and I'm not at all saying to stay away from social media altogether, or the news, or even crime podcasts. Such a thing. But just to have an awareness of how everything we put in is affecting the way that we're thinking and that. So just being aware of it. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear stuff in the background. Like, I have one kid who's crying. They're with their dad, so they're okay. But
it's real life. We do real life here. Yeah. Our technology's failing. Our kids are crying. Our lights are dim, but we're here.
Yeah, we're here.
Fair enough. Yeah, I do think that's a really fascinating point, and one to make or one to highlight is that what we consume affects not only the state of our heart and if there is fear in our mind, but it affects our perception of reality. And if we're feeding the fear, it's going to color our reality to be more fearful and less joyful and alive and experiencing all those things that God wants us to experience. And so if we're feeding instead our faith and our trust in God, then that's a totally different pathway. So what do you think God wants to say to us in our fears, Katie?
I think he wants us to know that he loves us and is protecting us. And I say that knowing that I'm not physically protected from absolutely everything, that some fears do happen. I don't know. It's not guaranteed, but that God's plan and his goodness and his love for me are better off as the focus of what I'm putting into my mind, and that he will guide me and protect me. I think that's what he wants us to know.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think there's something about, can we put our trust in God, because believing that he wants the best for us and all things work out for the good of those who love him, and thinking about putting our trust in him, believing that for ourselves and for our families. And there may be things that happen to us, but can we still trust that God has our best in mind, and that he will be with us through those things and guiding us and helping us? It's a big one, but I think that's the crux of the matter, and that's the key to building in that faith that is our turning point from fear. So we could say, without God, we will sit in our fears. It will alter our reality. We will experience less joy in our lives, or maybe no joy. We won't know how to access joy. And then there's this invitation to put your trust in God and to experience the joyful life that he has for us. There is a verse. I might have even created a banner here. There we are. Can you read that? It says, "I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears." Do you notice it says delivered me from my fears, not delivered me from the things that make me afraid? I think that's really interesting point. And recognizing the biblical language, I sought the Lord.
Yeah.
Can you clarify some of this for, help us to understand it in plain language, what this could mean for us?
Yeah, I think just in really, really quick context, it's helpful to know that this is written by David, who becomes a king, but there is a big chunk of his life where he's being pursued by the current king who wants to kill him. And so he's just constantly living in a state which would make any of us be fearful, like literally fearful for his life. And he has all these different things that happen during that time. But that his knowledge of who God is and of the character of God is such that even in this time and in this particular instance, he'd actually like pretended to be crazy to protect himself. He knows enough about the character of God and about the way that God has moved and protected him and held to his promises, that he's able to seek him out and to look for him and to call on his name and for him to be the one that delivers him. And when we look at the Psalms, are this poetry and song and all of this, but when we look at them, often it's about hard stuff like suffering and fear and betrayal and all this, but within it is this constant reminder of God's goodness, God's provision, God's protection. And like you were saying, when we can ground ourselves in that faith of who, it's really about knowing who God is. And that's a whole big, well, it's really a lifelong exploration and conversation. But knowing who God is and knowing that within our fear, that faith and that relationship and just knowing his absolute goodness, that we can be moved out of fear, but very importantly, like you said, not always moved out of the situation, but just know the faithfulness and the protection and the love of God within those situations. And I think that's what David is talking about here, that he sought the Lord and he answered me, so he knows his presence. And I mean, the other king, Saul's still trying to kill him at this point, but he's able to carry on without all of the fear. At least for now, he's going to call on God again. It doesn't mean it's gone forever. We come back to it again and again and again.
Yes. Yeah. I've lost all my light.
I wonder if something happened there.
In the world, I feel like every living, anything that was, I'm surprised we're still online. Everything has shut down on me. So maybe this is a sign. Maybe this is a good opportunity to just close with this. For those tuning in or who tune in at a later time, could fear be a turning point? Do you feel like fears are consuming you and you don't know which way to turn? You aren't even sure about how to find that way back to reality, and most importantly, joy, living in the moment. We'd love to share a new way of overcoming your fear through Jesus. We'll continue to share at these Wednesday night lives, but of course our young parents groups are all about this. And please reach out if you want a one-to-one conversation about faith and life. Both Katie and myself are available for that, as well as our other young moms and young dads leaders in the city. So don't hesitate to leave a message here on Facebook, or wait, one of my banners here. I want to make sure I can use them. Or you can email us at youngparents@yugta.ca or visit our website, youngparents.ca. And with that, we just wish you a great night and hope to see you here next Wednesday when all our technology will be working perfectly. Right, Katie?
Yes, it will. Yep.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.